Back when Mario was redefining 3D gameplay, and before Pokemon Mania took over North America, there was a bizarre little N64 game where you played as a robotic anime maid whose main attack was shaking things. And yeah, it's just as weird and brilliant as it sounds. This is Mischief Makers. And if you know, you know. This game released in 1997. And it didn't just slip through the cracks, it barrel rolled into obscurity and left behind one of the most loyal cult fan bases of the 5th console generation. It was loud, weird, and very unique compared to anything else on the N64. And yet, barely anyone bought it. Today we're diving headfirst into this offbeat classic. The chaotic charm, the Clancer aesthetic, and the grab and shake mechanics. And why Mischief Makers might be one of the boldest platformers of its time. So let's fire up that N64 and see what made this game shake. Let's jump back to the late 1990s to begin with. Back then, I remember being drawn to Mischief Makers for all the wrong reasons. The box art was weird. Marina, an anime-eyed robot maid on the front, had this confident stance and expressive design that screamed, "This game is different." I remember often looking at it in Walmart or Blockbuster, but being far more interested in the Zeldas and Marios of the time. I always figured I would get around to it eventually, but I never did back then. Like a lot of people, I ended up skipping it. It wasn't until about a decade ago that I finally picked up a copy and could not put it down. This quirky, unsettling Clancer world, the sheer creativity behind the mechanics, and the gameplay. It felt good. Not in a traditional Mario way, but in a new way. Grabbing, shaking, hurling. It was tactile in a way that most N64 games usually weren't. It blew me away how polished and precise a 2.5D platformer could feel on a system known mostly for early 3D. Enix handled the publishing in Japan, and Nintendo handled the publishing in North America. But the real creative force behind this game was a little quirky studio called Treasure. Yes, that Treasure. If you've ever played Gunstar Heroes, Dynamite Headdy, or Sin and Punishment, you know they're about chaos, creativity, and some of the most innovative gameplay of the 1990s. Formed by a group of ex-Konami developers who were tired of sequels and wanted to do their own thing, Treasure became a cult legend practically overnight. They were the kind of studio that never chased trends. They were the ones that set them, or ignored them entirely. They made boss rush games before that was cool. They mashed genres like chemists mixing up elixirs of pure fun. Their games were rarely mainstream hits, but they were almost always memorable. On the Nintendo 64, Treasure's entire footprint in the West came down to just a couple of games. Mischief Makers and Bengai-O. They also released Sin and Punishment in Japan, but that game would not come to the West until its Wii Virtual Console release later on. All three of their N64 games were risky, weird, and brilliant in their own ways. But Mischief Makers was the first, and in many ways, it was the boldest. You could tell right away this wasn't a Nintendo-developed game. The mechanics were wild, the visuals even wilder, and the pacing was unpredictable. It had Treasure's fingerprints all over it. Visually, Mischief Makers looks unlike anything else on the system. Brilliant sprite-based characters, animated over chunky, 3D-styled backgrounds, giving the whole game a very surreal 2.5D aesthetic. It looked like a 90s anime. Gameplay-wise, Mischief Makers wastes no time standing out from its platforming peers. Instead of using the N64's analog stick, the go-to for most 3D games of the time, movement is instead handled by the D-pad. Quick jetpack dashes are mapped to the C buttons, letting Marina boost in any direction with a tap. It feels a little stiff at first, especially if you're coming off smoother feeling games like Mario 64, but after just a few stages, it clicks, and once it does, the game starts to feel incredibly fluid. Traversal, combat, they're built around one principle: grabbing. Marina Lightyear doesn't punch or shoot, she grabs. Everything. It's the soul of the entire game. Before long, you'll be chaining together dashes, jumps, mid-air grabs, just like a pro. The controls might be unconventional, but they're surprisingly precise. There's even a crouching kick move that sends Marina sliding forward, and if you cancel out of it with a jump, she gets a huge burst of momentum, letting you cross gaps or reach high ledges you couldn't otherwise. The game constantly rewards you for experimenting with these mechanics. You'll grab enemies, hurl them into walls, launch yourself skyward by flinging off enemies or other objects. You can even snag missiles in mid-air and send them back to the sender like a Saturday morning cartoon hero. You can even pick up guns that enemy Clancers drop and use them and shoot like in a running gun. If it's not bolted down, Marina's probably already manhandled it. It's a gameplay loop that's surprisingly tactile and everything feels like it has weight and purpose. If you've ever played the game Rystar on the Sega Genesis, this might feel familiar. Like Rystar, Mischief Makers focuses on grabbing, throwing, and interacting with the environment in ways traditional platformers usually don't. But here, the chaos is dialed up. You're not just grabbing for traversal, you're stringing together your entire movement toolkit to overcome increasingly complex environments. It's less about speedrunning and more about style and control mastery. And at the center of this game is the mechanic Shake Shake. Marina literally yells it out every time you shake something. And she means it. If you shake a bomb, it might go off. If you shake an enemy Clancer, they'll panic and drop an item or gems. You can shake a box, and who knows what'll pop out. Power-ups, gems, or just complete chaos. The game teaches you quickly, if something looks suspicious, grab it and give it a shake. Everything in Mischief Makers feels like it's hiding something, like there's a secret, and that sense of discovery never really stops. And unlike most platformers of the era, Mischief Makers doesn't follow a one-size-fits-all level design. Each stage feels like its own mini-experiment. One level has you solving puzzles by riding clan balls and shaking them to open up warps. The next, you're chasing down some poor lady's runaway kids to bring them home. Then there's a level where you ride a rather freakish but adorable cat Clancer. It's incredibly varied, and that's intentional. Treasure didn't want you to settle into a comfort zone. They wanted to throw something new at you constantly. The levels are short and punchy, often built around a single concept. They rarely drag on, and more importantly, they don't repeat themselves. You never feel like you're playing a palette swap of the same idea. Now, let's take a second to talk about the Clancers. The weird, wide-eyed, mask-faced blob people that populate just about every inch of this game. They're equal parts adorable, unsettling, and completely absurd. The freakish and unsettling faces of these little Clancer guys is based on the Japanese Hanawa. They were little terracotta figures that were often used in rituals and buried with the dead, as far back as the 3rd century in Japan. Hanawa are also the inspiration behind the gyroids from Nintendo's Animal Crossing franchise. Now, in Mischief Makers, Clancers wobble, cry, shout nonsense, and generally act unpredictably. Sometimes they help you, sometimes they hurt you, sometimes they are just little goofy pedestrians. There's several different types of these guys. There's even quite a few that are important to the plot of the game. Their deadpan masks, lifeless eyes, and strange behavior become a part of the game's bizarre charm. Whether you're rescuing them, racing them, or shaking them until they drop goodies, the Clancers help define the offbeat tone that makes Mischief Makers so unforgettable. And then there are the bosses. Easily the most memorable part of the game. Some are classic figure out the weak point style fights. Others are full-on mechanical puzzles where you need to redirect projectiles, toss enemies into hazards, or use timing and environment manipulation to win. Mischief Makers was already quirky enough with its grab and shake antics, floating clan balls, and all-around surreal world. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the Beastector. Imagine taking a classic Super Sentai team, mixing it with the Transformers, and then dunking it into pure concentrated Japanese weirdness. Yeah, they're exactly as awesome as they sound. The Beastector is made up of 3 members, Lunar, Mirko, and Terrace, each representing different animals and each sporting their own color-coded robot suits. It's straight out of the Power Rangers. You've got Lunar, the wolf-themed leader who's basically your classic Red Ranger type. Cool, confident, a little bit edgy. Then there's Mirko, the bird-like tactician who brings speed, smarts, and snark. Finally, Terrace, the brute strength gorilla guy who's all about power moves. Throughout the game, you'll run into these guys multiple times, usually in battles that quickly escalate into epic high-energy showdowns, complete with dramatic poses, colorful explosions, and even those iconic cheesy pre-battle monologues. Treasure clearly knew exactly what they were doing here, tapping into that Saturday morning nostalgia with full force. What makes the Beast Sectors completely memorable isn't just their stylish entrances and flashy attacks, it's the genuine charm and humor woven into their every interaction. Despite being your rivals, they come off as strangely likable, and their dynamic adds a layer of playful rivalry that elevates the entire Mischief Makers experience. When you finally get into the epic multi-stage battle against their combined mech form, it's pure unfiltered joy and a big fun factor. And honestly, they embody everything that makes Mischief Makers special: absurd creativity, and a fearless embrace of its own bizarre identity. It's weird, it's wonderful, and it proves once again that Treasure wasn't afraid to shake things up. Something that's particularly interesting about this game, like a lot of Treasure games, Mischief Maker hides some of the best content behind optional challenges, and in this case, that's the golden gems. Each level in the game has one hidden gold gem, and grabbing them usually requires a bit of extra effort. Solving a puzzle, beating a boss quickly, or finding a sneaky path off the main route. They're not mandatory to finish the game, but they're absolutely worth hunting down if you want the full experience. Why is that? Well, because collecting all 52 gems unlocks the game's true ending. If you finish the game without them, you'll still get an ending, but it's short and a little underwhelming. But with all the gems in hand, you're rewarded with an expanded final cutscene that adds more personality, closure, and heart. A proper send-off to Marina's wild journey. It's a classic case of Treasure rewarding players who master the game's mechanics and dig a little bit deeper. And let's be honest, once you start getting good at shaking everything in sight, you're gonna want to grab every last one of these shiny gold nuggets anyways. And then on to the story. The game kicks off with Professor Theo, Marina's creator, getting kidnapped by the evil Empire, because of course he does. One minute he's just enjoying a vacation on the planet Clancer, the next he's getting hauled off by a bunch of masked weirdos for some vague, nefarious plan involving cloning his brain and using his intellect to rule the world. Enter Marina Lightyears. Part robot, part maid, all business. She's our sassy but loyal protagonist. Your mission as Marina is simple. Rescue Professor Theo, but naturally this involves chasing him across an increasingly bizarre series of Clancer-infested landscapes, punching through armies of goons, and dealing with an escalating cast of mini-bosses. You'll end up meeting a fun cast of friendly Clancers that you'll pal around with and help throughout the levels. They're goofy, dramatic, and so full of heart. Despite the quirky visuals and goofy tone, the core premise stays surprisingly focused. Find the professor, save the day, and shake everything in your path. It's the classic hero saves mentor setup. But Mischief Makers doesn't just dip between moods, it slams on the gas and veers from slapstick to sincere at full speed. And somehow, it works. This tonal whiplash is part of what makes Mischief Makers so memorable. The game swings wildly from absurd comedy to genuinely dark and emotional moments. And it does so without warning. Characters cry, they scream, they betray each other. Marina herself has to carry Professor Theo's unconscious body across multiple levels while fending off waves of enemies. The game walks a tightrope between melodrama and mockery, and the fact that it never collapses under its own weirdness is kind of brilliant. It feels handcrafted, like a game made by a small team that poured in everything they loved, from mecha anime to off-the-wall comedy, and that's why it sticks. Then there's the music. Man, this game has a beautiful soundtrack. Mischief Makers has a soundtrack that doesn't just complement the game, it elevates it. Each level has its own distinct energy. Whether it's the cheesy sound of Clancer Town, or the pulse-pounding tension of a boss fight. The festival theme? Absolute jam. Space mech battle? Straight up anime level hype. The music was composed by Norio Hanzawa, also known as Non, a longtime Treasure collaborator. His signature style blends catchy melodies with chaotic experimental flourishes. If you've ever played Gunstar Heroes, you've already heard his work. Non's score in Mischief Makers manages to be goofy, dramatic, eerie, and triumphant, all within the same game. It's one of the most underrated soundtracks on the N64, and honestly, one of the best. So, you're probably thinking, why didn't Mischief Makers explode in popularity? Well, part of it comes down to timing. In 1997, the Nintendo 64 was deep in its 3D golden era. Super Mario 64 had already blown minds and redefined how 3D games control. Players were hungry for sprawling environments, open exploration, and analog stick precision. Games were judged by how immersive and polygon-packed they were. And then Mischief Makers shows up. A side-scrolling 2.5D sprite game that looked like something out of a weird alternate future of the Super Nintendo. It wasn't just retro, it was actively defiant of the trend. By the late 90s, sprites were considered yesterday's news. Kids weren't looking for games that reminded them of the past. They were chasing what looked new and exciting. Boxy polygons were the future, even if they aged like milk. A game that looked this flat, this stylized, it felt foreign in the worst way to many casual buyers. Then there was the anime influence. Yes, Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z were breaking into the West, but in '97, it still wasn't fully mainstream. Marina's big expressive anime eyes, the melodrama, the over-the-top cutscenes, it didn't resonate with everyone. In fact, some players were outright confused by the tone and aesthetic. And the game's obscurity wasn't helped by poor marketing in the West either. Enix, before its merger with Square, they had a tiny presence in the US. So Nintendo stepped up to publish Mischief Makers in North America and handle its advertising. They produced at least one commercial, but it leaned heavily into the game's quirky Clancer aesthetic and the shake antics, coming off as bizarre and confusing without clearly showing the gameplay. For a market obsessed with 3D blockbusters, the oddball ad didn't really do the game any favors. The result? A game that felt ahead of its time, or maybe just outside of time entirely. It didn't fit the mold, and the mold was everything. But what hurt it in the 90s, that's exactly what made it unforgettable later on. Mischief Makers didn't sell well when it launched. The game charted modestly in Japan and barely registered in North America. For a game published by Enix and developed by a studio as talented as Treasure, it came and went without much fanfare. Critics at the time were confused. Some praised its originality and tight controls, but others called it repetitive or too short. The average review score hovered in the 6s and the 7s. A lot of the reviewers probably didn't quite know what to make of it. It wasn't flashy, it didn't follow the mold, and it didn't try to compete with the rising stars of 3D gaming. But despite its rocky debut, Mischief Makers began building something better than mainstream success. A loyal cult fan following. Over time, people who played it started talking. They started writing blogs, making tribute videos, breaking the game down in speedruns. And for every person who discovered it years later through emulation or game store hunting, the same phrase kept popping up. How did I miss this? It's rare to see a game this full of ideas, where every level tries something new, every boss is a puzzle, and the main character is a rocket-boosting, gem-shaking cyborg maid. Yeah, she's just awesome. Strong, direct, and endlessly quotable. Today, Mischief Makers is a bona fide cult classic. It never got a sequel, never got a re-release, but it's lived on through fan art, retrospective videos, cosplays, and memes. Marina is still remembered, not as a mascot, but as a symbol of what made the 90s weird and wonderful. And in the ocean of N64 nostalgia, this game doesn't just tread water, it shakes things up. It stood out because it meant something to people who gave it a chance. So, was Mischief Makers too weird for its own good? Maybe. But that's exactly what makes it so unforgettable now. It was Treasure doing what they do best. Taking risks, getting weird, and making something that doesn't fit into any one box. If you missed this one back in the day, now's the time. Grab a controller, give it a shake, and dive into one of the most unusual, innovative, and oddly heartfelt games in the N64 library. Because Mischief Makers didn't just try to be different, it succeeded. So yeah, if you've never played Mischief Makers, I hope this video gives you a reason to check it out. It's not perfect, but it is unforgettable. Well, that's all I have for today. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and please remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you all next time.